After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, and they asked, "Where is the one who has been born, King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had called together all the people's chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least amongst the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go, search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." And after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. And then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. First of all, who in the world are the Magi? First word to that, they're not kings. They are counselors to kings. In practice, they are astrologers. Magos, Magi, refers to those who study the stars. So naturally, this is a story about stargazers. And they believed that they could read images or ideas about the future from reading the stars. Second thing, we don't know their names, despite the Christmas songs, nor do we know there were three of them. We only know there were Magi plural. I mean, 2 Magi can give 3 gifts, 10 Magi can give 3 gifts. We don't know how many there were. But what we do know is they were concerned about to find what this star indicated about future rulers, in this case, the future ruler of Judea. So they made a pilgrimage. Probably, the Greek suggests, they came from the east. But it's possible they came from Anatolia, which would be northwest, which is, in fact, Turkey. Because what it says is we saw his star in the east, or maybe it says we saw his star at its rising. Either way, they were coming to Jerusalem and then Bethlehem in due course. Now, one of the things that may help better understand the story is that the ancient people thought stars were actually beings. Some of the ancients even associated stars with angels. And actually that makes a much better sense of the story, because there are no stars that just sort of lead somebody from Jerusalem to Bethlehem and then park itself over somebody's house. Much more likely to be an angelic being who's led them to this particular spot. So that's kind of the context of this. The text that's being cited in this passage is from Micah, and it's a prediction about a future king in Judah. Needless to say, King Herod was nervous in the service when he heard this, because he's very slimly Jewish and mainly Idumean, which is to say Edomites. The Edomites were the enemies of the Jews in the Old Testament. So he holds on to power just by using power. And what he really wants is not to come and worship the new Christ child. What he really wants to do is come and get rid of him. And of course, that's the story that's the sequel to this one here. So the Magi go to Bethlehem. And one of the little piece of legend that we need to deconstruct, Jesus was not born in a barn, nor was he rejected by some Holiday Inn Express in Bethlehem. There was no such place in Bethlehem. What the Lucan text actually says is they put him in the back of the house where they would keep the beast of burden, because there was no room in the guest room. So when the Magi get there considerably later, not at the same time as the shepherds, we hear that they were at home. The family was at home, and they visited him at home, and they left gifts. The gifts are gold, frankincense, and myrrh. All of these are gifts fit for a king, involving things that a king regularly used and needed. Of course, gold, because he needed to have money to run his reign and to do deals with other nations when that time came. But the frankincense was burned as a sort of deodorant of the royal court. It was burned to make the place smell better. And then, of course, there's incense, and it was burned for religious purposes. The incense going up, and you can actually hear about this, the incense going up represents prayers going up to God. So what we're talking about here is gifts that the king will have a successful reign, so praying to God that he will have the resources to do what he needs to do, namely gold. And when people came to visit him, they wouldn't be off-put by the smell or the odor of the palace. Some other interesting details about this. In Matthew's gospel, what we hear regularly, not only in regard to the Magi, but in regard to Joseph himself, is that they are guided by dreams. They're guided by dreams. Many Christians over church history, and in biblical times too, have had dreams that were premonitions about things that were yet to come. And certainly in this case, that's what's going on at the turning point in this story, where the Magi go home by another way, not the way they came, by another way, having been warned in a dream. One other thing about this story, which is really quite important. Imagine being a young woman, a new mother, in this case Mary, who would have been a young teenager. Most women were betrothed by the age of 12 or 13 and married by the age of 13 or 14. Imagine a young woman who's gone on this ordeal of bringing her husband with her on this journey for the census in Bethlehem, being very pregnant, and so pregnant that when she gets to Bethlehem, soon thereafter, she gives birth to a child and puts him in a feeding trough where the animals would normally eat in the back of a house. The truth of the matter is this must have been a very traumatic experience, no matter that there was warnings from God that this was supposed to happen. One other thing that we should say about this story. The truth of the matter is, as important as Old Testament prophecy is in Matthew for this story, nobody in early Judaism, so far as we can tell, was looking for a virginally conceived Messiah. They did not read Isaiah 7:14 that way. It does say in the Greek, a virgin will conceive and give birth to a child, and his name shall be called Emmanuel. In the Hebrew, it says a young woman, a young nubile woman of marriageable age will conceive and give birth to a child. Everybody read that to mean, okay, conceived by the normal means, not conceived by no aid from a human being that would be a male. So it's a shock to Mary to hear that she's going to be pregnant without yet having known her husband. And then at the end of this story, what happens in Matthew 1:25 is we hear, and Joseph was not knowing her until after the child was delivered. And the phrase in the Greek suggests that he was knowing her after that, and they had subsequent children. This is a powerful and precious story, but it's also a story about following God's guidance, even if it comes in the form of a dream and not in the form of a scripture. The holy couple fled to Egypt when they learned that King Herod was after them. And so not only did Jesus get born in Bethlehem, he also fulfilled the prophecy, out of Egypt I will call my son. This story sets up all of that in this particular time frame. One last thing. King Herod died in 2 BC. That means Jesus was born before 2 BC, which in turn means that the monk who set up our calendar got it wrong. Somewhere Jesus was born between 4 and 6 BC. And that's one of the ways we need to understand that the historical substance of this story matters. It's not just about telling nice Bible stories. It's about recognizing that God, in space and time, came at a historical point in time and sent forth his Son so that we might be redeemed. And this story is about how that happened unexpectedly during the reign of King Herod in Judah. And indeed, it was all and more than anyone could have imagined.